Hi, I'm Alison Warner, founder of Evolve and Grow and author of Build and Grow. Welcome to the Evolve and Grow podcast show, where I share lots of useful tips and advice to tradespeople who are looking to move off the tools and grow a really successful business. So joining me on the show today is Ciaran Brennan, co-founder and commercial director of a company called Live Costs. Now, this is cost management software specifically for the construction industry. Kieran is the co-founder and commercial director, as I've just said. And prior to doing this, he served as his apprenticeship as a carpenter in Dublin. He then progressed his career in Sydney and Brisbane before opening his first business in Perth, Australia. Kieran learned the how-tos of running a construction business by making mistakes on the job, which I'm intrigued to hear more about. And after many years on site, Kieran now devotes his time to Live Costs, who are on a mission to help frustrated company owners remove labour-intensive Excel processes from their business so they can see exactly where they win and lose money in real time. So welcome, Kieran. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Alison. Great to be here. Thank you.
As I just said there in introducing you, you talk about, it's interesting because you've come from being on the tools and then you've moved into quite a different role, I would imagine. But tell us a little bit more about those mistakes that you refer to there.
Yeah, I suppose, like any carpenter, went into an apprenticeship model, followed a lot of the family would have been embedded in construction. So would have followed a lot of uncles, brothers, all that type of stuff. And but unfortunately for me, I learned one quick lesson in business, that timing matters. I qualified into one of the worst recessions Ireland has ever seen back in 2006. So it was a decision for me, which was, I'd say, somewhat forced upon me. My brother, for example, went to work in London, and for me, I just decided that I was young enough to do something a bit more adventurous, and I went to Australia. And I suppose that's where I started to climb the construction ladder, if you want to put it that way. Started running jobs, and then I started to, I suppose, get another lesson as running these jobs. Started to see that I was more interested in the business structure of it, and I started, I thought at that point in time that I was doing pretty much everything, that the job was everything, but there was a business side to it that I wasn't seeing, and decided to go and open up my own business. And very much learned some harsh lessons pretty quickly, that, the project is one element of it, and then you've got the business side of things. And that's where I had to do a lot of learning. So a couple of failed attempts before we got one right.
Interesting. And looking back over that time, what would you perhaps have done differently?
I suppose if I'm thinking back to mistakes that we would have made very early, and I suppose anything that's repeatable in a business needs to have a system and a process behind it.
Right,
and I suppose that's something that we didn't quite recognize very early. So we're doing the same stuff, repeating the same stuff, and no process behind it. And if we took on a project and scaled a bit, we're bringing in new staff, and there was no process behind that, no real system for staff to follow, and that was a problem for us. So I decided that I needed to educate myself quickly on business, and I leaned towards education in a couple of ways. I went back with my tail between my legs and took a job for someone else because I wanted to learn more about the business structure. I went and worked for a supplier in the construction industry in Western Australia. I wanted to learn about margins and supply chain and all the type of stuff that I knew I needed more education on. And then I went and got educated on business, and I joined a group called the Entourage in Sydney, which were led by Australia's best young entrepreneurs at the time. And that was brilliant for me to get that community feel. We used to fly into Sydney once a quarter, and we'd sit with all other business owners, and we just share knowledge. And that was key to me developing from tradesman to, let's say, running a company, to actually understanding how companies can scale. And that was that. I look back at that time very, very fondly and said that was the transition point where I said, now I understand. Now I'm starting to think differently.
Interesting. And what did you do differently as a result of that? You say you started to think differently, but what did you actually start doing differently?
I started to understand the what I call the five fundamentals of the business, and I started to deploy a lot of energy to them. And sales, marketing, not something that I would have thought too much about at the time. Operations, our product and our service, like when they were mapped together, and then my team. And I looked at them five areas, and I said, if I can get these right, if I can get these five areas of the business right, I know I'll be doing okay. So I just started to build systems around them five key areas, but I found the five key areas of the business, and started to deploy a lot of my time in thinking about how we could grow each one of them areas individually.
Interesting, interesting. And can you give an example of something that you can think, right, I focused on that, then I did that, and this is what changed?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose let's even we've talked about marketing for a second. Like marketing in a traditional marketing world, like I suppose if I frame it up this way, how I get in front of customers today and how we communicate with customers today versus how I would have done it running a trade business, it's just worlds apart. It's so different. So a traditional marketer might sit down with a trades business, and it's just not going to be relevant because we live in a tender world. We live in a lot of the time there can be follow up process like maintenance and stuff like that. And it's just different. And I suppose what I had to learn was what is the world's best practice for marketing, and how can I deploy that to construction? So I started to think about that, and I started to think about and understand what sales process meant and how could I win on sales process. So the best example I can give is one element of our company was we done kitchens, and part of the kitchen would be a design process. And what I figured out with the competitors was that they had about a 2 week lead in time for they turn up to the client's property, whether we were doing the bulk of the work or whether we were just doing the kitchen element. It would depend. And they had about a 2 week lead in time before they get a design back. And they had a bit of a longer process then in terms of actually getting the kitchen booked in. And I just thought to myself, if we could better that and make a better experience from the off, wouldn't we be onto something different? So we decided that we could invest in a software package that would allow us to do design, but price design. And we talk about BIM today, and BIM being used on tier one projects across the world. This was a element of BIM where we could take a design of a kitchen. We simply could turn up to the house. So let's say we turn up to the Joneses this evening. We could pull the model in, do the design while we sit there, and price a job while we're sitting there. Meaning that when we left the job, Mr. and Mrs. Jones had our price sitting there on the counter. But by the time our competitors were arriving up, we'd gone through the follow-up process. We were into colouring. We're now into taking deposits. By the time they even got getting the designs back. So that was just like one example of really starting to think about your customer and the experience that you're providing to your customer, and how can I do better?
Absolutely. And it's not rocket science, is it? And it's not, to me, that it's not just about the speed, it's what impression that then creates and how that builds trust. Because it's a lot of these things are happening at a subconscious level, aren't they? In doing that and improving that process, you are by default positioning yourself in the market as a company that is well run. And so, a kitchen is not a small purchase. And so if people are going to be parting with that amount of money, they want to be able to trust the company that's coming in to do that. And it can imply that if a company is taking longer, that there may be problems further down the line. And this is, we talk about this all the time. It's not about the price, it's about the perception of value that you create in that whole experience. And there'll always be people out there who are willing to pay that little bit more if they think that the job is going to be done well and to standard. And if there are any problems that occur along the line, they'll be managed. The company will take ownership of them, and it'll be a stress-free experience. So really, really interesting. So I'm intrigued. First of all, tell us a little bit more about live costs and what the software does, and then I'll be intrigued to find out how you went from that in Australia to coming back to Ireland and starting this company.
Yeah, so the company that we were running out in Australia, we had an offer to sell. and we took the offer to sell. I stayed on for a bit as part of the handover process, and it gave me a lot of time to think. And I thought about what next. And my brother Niall, who was a co-founder of that business, he'd made a move back to Ireland. He was starting to be back building again, and we were having conversations around maybe I would jump in there. What would we do? And I suppose at that time I was doing a lot of research, and I was looking at, okay, if I'm going to go back into a building company, whatever I deploy my energy to, it's going to be all in. It's going to be like, it's not, this isn't 40, 50 hours. This is I think we've talked previously, Alison, I'm not a big believer in work-life balance. I just think it's life, right? So I'm making a decision here that I'm going to go all in on an element of my life. So I'm looking at, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to want to be the best at it. I want to go. So I start researching softwares at the time and saying, okay, what can we do differently? What's in the Irish market? And then I realized that there was nothing out there that I felt was key to me running, either if we're starting off in the trades or a building company. And it was really technically underserved. And that was interesting to me. So I started to do deeper research. And suddenly I felt myself veering off course a little bit, deep into construction technology, and finding that really that there was an open market here. And if somebody was going to build a solution, it was going to be someone from the industry that actually knew what was needed for that. So when I analysed then from a personal point of view, okay, do I want to do this? And I start speaking to Niall as well, because if I was going to deal with he was going to have to come with me. And, at the conversations we were having at the time, as I say, like, whatever we do, it's going to be 50, 60 hours a week. We're never going to be turned off by it. It's going to be constantly in the head. It becomes a bit of an obsession that what you're trying to achieve. So what I loved about the technology space is the ceiling was uncapped. We could dominate a market. We could go national, then it goes international. Suddenly there was just this uncapped ceiling. And I thought, if I'm going to deploy so much energy and obsession to something, why not let it be uncapped for where this can go? Whereas I felt the building company, we're going to put the same energy into it to be the best. But yeah, we'd be localized. And that was just a personal decision that we decided, let's do it. Let's go for it.
Interesting. And so, yeah, Live Costs, tell us a little bit more about the software and specifically what it does in a nutshell.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, we live in between estimating and accounts. So we'll find a lot of companies are using some sort of software to produce a quote at a builder level. It's going to be bill of quantities. And then they're using something like Xero or Sage or QuickBooks in the final accounts. And what we, from our experience and what we discovered when we done the market research, is in between that space is quite messy. It's where companies end up in Excel world, and that's where things can get out of hand. So we decided that in between estimating and in between accounts, i.e., where the project is actually live, that companies needed sight of what was happening in real time. Not when costs were coming in after the fact and we run a report and get the costs into Excel, which is a labor-intensive process. There was an opportunity to provide real-time data so we can clearly see as business owners exactly where we stand on a project, never waiting on the information to come in. So that was the problem that we decided to go out and fix. It was really just a disconnected systems and processes within companies.
It makes so much sense, because I can't think of a builder that I've worked with who hasn't had that question or that need of around profitability of projects. They can see the profitability of their entire company, but obviously when you dig beneath the surface, and there is things like tracking codes on Xero and such like, as you'll know. You could have a one project that is making money, but you could have another project that is losing a significant amount of money, and you're not going to see that necessarily if you're just looking at it all lumped together. And so it's a particular interest to me, because I just know how often I hear that as a question. How can I see which of my projects are profitable? So people have an awareness that they should be able to see that, but there's a frustration there that they're not seeing it as easily as.
And it's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned Xero, because we would have used Xero ourselves in our own company. And I suppose what we found is when we started to do a lot of the research is that companies will lean on their financial package, like their accounting software, to manage their project costs. And simply, Alison, it's just not designed to do that. Like Xero did not design Xero for AB construction company to manage project costs. They've designed a project feature to try and help a problem because there's probably demand coming, but it's just not designed to do that. And that's, again, one of the areas that we felt if we can seamlessly integrate with the accounts package and do it just for construction, well, then we have the best of both worlds. We have a beautiful accounting system and our project details in one.
So my next question you probably answered right there, but I'll ask it anyway, just to give you the opportunity to add anything else in. And the question is, what makes live costs different, do you think, to any other software out on the market, and what are the USPs?
So there's a couple of things. A lot of systems out there will require a change in a company-wide change is probably the best way to put it. And a company-wide change, as you well know, will involve a lot of buy-in. And with buy-in comes resistance. And what we found is that there's a common problem here. And the common problem is when we asked, and we've done a lot of research, hundreds of business owners, what's the one thing that keeps you awake at night time? And the answer we got consistently was, I just don't know if I'm losing money or not. I don't get that information until it's too late. So we said, okay, well, how can we just fix that? Okay, without going into a company-wide restructure of everything we need to do. The systems out there do that, but we won't do that. We'll just be different. Can we just plug in and seamlessly plug in between estimating and accounts and just tell business owners and solve that one little problem where we can see exactly where we're winning and losing money? So that's what's different about us to other systems that are on the market. We don't look in and say we're going to change everything in your business. We're going to plug in and solve a couple of problems. One is we're going to tell you whether you're losing money or not. That's the big one. And then second of all, what's different about us is it's funny when I think back to this, and I was doing my research and I was saying, well, what does the business model look like behind a technology company? And, we quickly come across SaaS. And I said, okay, what does SaaS really mean? And, software as a service. And I chuckled to myself at the time saying, I don't know many SaaS products that I've bought where service would be top of the agenda. And I decided that would be different for us. So our knowledge of customer comes to mind here, where if I'm a supplier, if I'm a local supplier, I'm Travis Perkins, I'm Hughes, and I'm the rep in there, these guys are constantly are there at the end of a phone to pick up the phone and have a problem. My material isn't here yet. I've got damaged material. This needs to go back. Right. So the level you think about, you put yourself in the customer's shoes, the level of service, the expectation level is very, very high. And what we decided on day one is that's industry expectation on customer service. And just because we're a technology company does not mean that our service can drop. So the one thing that we hang our hat on and we're very proud of is the service.
Well, I think it's something I talk about all of the time because I'm passionate about it. And maybe I'm getting old. I don't know. I think customer service is getting worse. So I think any company that keeps the customer forefront of mind, you'll always have a customer.
Well, I mean, it's so important because you're talking about business systems here, and we talk about, like, if I have a problem in my business and let's say it's a financial problem, for example, and someone asks me to create a ticket. I mean, straight away, my user experience is just so bad there. What I'm saying, I've got a problem here. This is a financial problem. It could be a financial problem in a project. So our take on that is, it's an account manager. Pick up the phone. A lot of the time, it's a mobile phone, because that's what the expectation is.
Exactly. I want to speak to somebody. Yeah,
I want to speak to someone, and I want to get this resolved.
Yes, exactly.
If they have that experience with other suppliers, like as I just use, Travis Perkins, Houston's, whoever it might be, Selgo, and then we have a different user experience, I don't think that works well. So it's keeping that commonality and keeping that service part of SaaS. That's just so important for us.
Yeah, really interesting, really interesting. And, I'm guessing, do you have a few clients that realize once they start using the software that they're actually losing money at the front end, at the estimating stage?
So we do get a lot of comments that we will keep your estimators pretty honest. So, for example, we can take an estimate, we can bring it across the live costs. And for example, we've allowed 25 grand on first fixed joinery. Pretty quickly we're going to know whether that's absolutely on point to be 25 grand or whether we're actually over by grand, a grand and a half, whatever it might be. So it does allow, but I mean, there's learnings in that. So, for example, I can give a good example. We had a company that came on board just recently, and I had a follow up call with the managing director, and he said one thing that we learned was when we used to start a project. So they're a building company. We have carpenters in house. We used to have the carpentry as a sum in the project, and we would try and say, okay, we've an allowance in there. Let's call it 50k for carpentry, and what they've done differently is they've broken it out into first fix, second fix, and roofing. But by doing that, they learned that the guys that they have are actually very good on first and second fix, but they're not very good on the roofing. So they've got, let's say they've got 20 grand in for first fix, so 20 grand in for second fix, and now they break it out 10 grand into roofing. But the roofing was going over budget each time. So what it's allowed them to do is, by having a visual on that data, which is probably problem number one, we just never really have a visual on that particular data. First of all, there's a visual. And second of all, what they do now, which is just so simple, they've a subcontractor who specialises in roofing. They have a project, 10 grand sum in for roofing. They sub it out to a guy. He's going to have a fixed price of 8 grand, 2 grand on the roof. Away we go, and we move on. So they're able to focus their crew on what the crew are actually good at.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because we find this frequently, that there's problems right at the front end with the estimating, and obviously if you've got it wrong at that stage, then you haven't got a cat and hell's chance of pulling it back by the time the project's finished. I think it's fair to say that a lot of business owners sometimes struggle with technology and the implementation of it. So how do you help your clients get the most out of the system?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of the time we will start easy. And when we sit down with a company, first of all, the first question we ask is we need to understand the current workflow. And when we talk workflow and take technology off the table for a second, it's an understanding of how they do things today. And then what we want to do is we just want to replace that with some automation and technology. So for example, if we just look at one element, which is, let's say, invoice processing for a second, what we do is we'd sit with whoever it is that's doing the invoice processing, and we'd say, let's map out exactly how this works today. So some companies will have a purchase order system in play. They'll talk us through that, whether it's paper-based or it's digital, doesn't really matter. Then they have a delivery method to take that in. And we'll just map that whole process out so we understand the workflow. And then we'll introduce the technology into that workflow. So it's just going to speed up that process. So suddenly when we start talking about different features and processes, we're just talking about, okay, there's your workflow today. Now we're just going to do it this way. And then it comes down to supporting that. So we look at it as looking at today's workflow, replacing it with some automation, and then being there as a support arm to that particular customer to make sure that if there's any issues that come up from that, we can be there. And again, support being real support, not bloody tickets. And then it's just, I suppose, from a UI UX point of view, it's every system, every feature, and every screen we look at, we just think about how can we make this simpler to understand. We always challenge ourselves and we challenge the team. Can it be easier? One of the simple things we come up with in Live Cost was a traffic light system. Everybody understands traffic lights. So by looking at a particular piece of data, whether it be a cost piece of data or a project, can a traffic light tell me what's going on here? For example, a green cost, we use something similar, even we just talked about zero there. A green cost has been integrated to send to zero, an amber cost, it hasn't. Simple stuff like that. A red cost, we've gone over budget. So I suppose, it's really about just looking at workflows. It's, automating workflows. So without, completely upending a business, and then it's about supporting them and trying to use
holding them by the hand a bit, really.
Exactly.
Guiding them through it. Absolutely crucial. And what about if you were thinking of all of the clients that you've got, is there one that stands out perhaps as a business that has achieved some fantastic results using the software?
I suppose there's different users of Live Cost. I suppose that's probably worth pointing. Like a business owner will use Live Cost because they just want access to the dashboards. They want to see exactly where these projects and get notifications if something isn't going right. You've got your estimators will look at project data, like old project data, and see, can we use that data as learnings going forward? And then in the day-to-day, we've got whoever's maybe in charge of purchasing, whether that's individual sites or whether it's through a head of purchasing, whatever it might be, they're a user. And then we collect labor hours through apps. So there's different types of users would get different types of value. The one that can be quantified quite easily is the, whoever it is in the business that's actually processing the invoices. So there's a process out there that's been around a long time for an accounts payable called, it's basically AP automation. It's called a three-way match. A three-way match means that when an invoice comes into a company, we have a method to collect who ordered it, i.e. a purchase order. Did we have it delivered? And then from a construction point of view, what project is it related to? So the fact that process is still manual in a company is baffling to me, when this particular automation and three-way automation has been around in many industries for many, many years. But for some reason, construction companies today are still accepting an invoice, a lot of the time printing an invoice, looking for some sort of reference to who ordered it, chasing up site for good received notices like delivery notices, taking that information, popping into a project budget in Excel, maybe then manually posting on the Xero. So we kill that process, and we ran some numbers against it. And for that particular person in that seat that does that role, i.e. processing an invoice, we're looking at about a 70-80% saving of time just on that one particular task.
Yeah, it is interesting how the industry, I do think the whole COVID thing has changed it. We're having, for example, when clients sign up with us now, they're not even questioning how the program will be delivered.
Yes.
Whereas before it'd be like, oh, I'd prefer to see you face to face. It's not even questioning us. I think it has accelerated that acceptance and that move towards embracing technology, which can only be a good thing. And that, I guess, that brings us nicely on to my next question, which actually, let me ask you this one first. What changes do you see that are likely to take place within the industry in the future?
I think if we just look at the construction technology space, and we just separate that away for a second, investment into construction technology is absolutely exploding globally at the moment. So that's got to filter its way down.
Yes.
So what does that mean? And it means that we're in the process of being disrupted. And, construction is the second least digitized industry globally, other than agriculture. Last time we looked, so it needs to move. Okay, so we've been here for this undisrupted industry for too long. Now it's there's a lot of money going in, has been going in for the last number of years, and COVID has actually accelerated that again. So that now is going to filter down. So what does that mean? I mean, it means that over the next 5 years that, we're going to have to be keeping our eye on what's happening, because a simple change in a technology, in a system or a process can give our competitors, that 2-3% extra, which is going to be struggling. Then we're going to have younger companies coming up. They're just more open to this, of course, as well. So for me, like if I'm putting my trade hat on, my builder hat on, like, I'm keeping on top of what's going on out there. And that doesn't mean I need to know about everything. But if there's particular problems in my business that I know that are just little inefficiencies, I'm going to be keeping my finger on the pulse and looking at them inefficiencies and saying, what else is out there? There's got to be other systems out there. And getting involved in organizations where there's other trade business owners is probably going to be great. Being involved in any type of educational groups is going to be great, because you lean on them types of companies to be able to inform you, hey, there's a problem you have with XYZ. Have you seen this new company? They've been around a few years. Looks like they're gaining a bit of traction. That's the type of things that I'd be starting to think about it, over the next few years.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think, that philosophy you can apply to any business owner, can't you? You just can't afford to not be aware of what's going on around you and what's changing, because change is just accelerating at such a rate that we've never seen before. And you've got to be seeing, what's coming and what's next, so that you can adapt. Otherwise, there's a danger you won't survive. That's the brutal reality of it.
And it's going to change quick. And like that doesn't mean that, we need to be absolutely finger on the pulse of every single piece of change. We certainly don't. But if we can gain these little 2-3% over time by just improving the efficiencies that are out there, that's only good. I mean, even just back to your previous point on the the acceleration and the adoption of being able to meet with companies over Zoom. Like what we found now is it's actually the preference, whereby pre-COVID, we'd book in with a company, we'd have to book in the time. Now we have to get everyone back in the office. So, okay, Sarah won't be available on Mondays and Tuesdays, and we have to get John in, and he has to come back from site. Now we have Sarah logging in from home. We've got, Bill from office, Johnny's on site, and we're just connecting, where the efficiency even in how we deliver support and training because of COVID has just been accelerated. So as an industry, I think we've taken a big step forward here. Pre-COVID, this, even like stuff like Zoom meetings and stuff, it was accepted, but it certainly wasn't to the adoption level that we see now.
Yeah. So what are Live Costs plans for the next 1 to 2 years?
We've just talking on COVID there. We've had a busy COVID. We've started to push ourselves into markets such as Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. But for us, the main focus for us has always been the UK and Ireland. So it's definitely for the next 1-2 years that there won't be any sort of focus away from that. We do have plans to become market leader there, so we certainly don't want to be having our heads shifted away from that until that's achieved.
Okay, it sounds like exciting times, but yeah, you've definitely got the opportunity to take it global, because it's the same problems around the globe in the industry, isn't it?
It really is.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so just the global thing is so interesting, because as we started to attract interest from the likes of Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, what's so interesting is that the set of problems that the companies come to you, whether it's in Cape Town or Auckland and Sydney and whatever it might be, Birmingham, it doesn't matter. It's the same international set of problems that companies have, which does make the opportunity exciting for us. That once you solve the problem.
So, where can listeners go to find out more, Kieran? Where's the best place?
Like on a personal level, find me on LinkedIn, Ciaran Brennan. The company, livecost.com, search livecost.com. And we also try to connect with people through our own podcast, which is just recently rebranded and launched, called Time and Materials Podcast. So some great guests on there, Alison, as you'll well know. So people can find us there.
Okay, great. And the podcast show is on the website, is it?
The podcast show is, so we're on Apple, Spotify. You just search Time Materials, and then you can find previous episodes then on the website at livecost.com.
Fantastic. Okay, well, it's been a really interesting discussion, Kieran. I think we're on the same page regarding a lot of aspects of the industry, and I know there's going to be some huge value there that you've shared with us for our listeners. So thank you so much for giving up your time and coming on the show. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Alison. Appreciate it.
I really hope you have enjoyed today's podcast. I would love to invite you to join our Trades and Builders Business Growth Group on Facebook, where I regularly share lots of information to help you create a more successful trades business. You can also order a copy of my book, Build and Grow, which is available on Amazon.